The day her ex-husband laughed at her in the middle of the hospital cafeteria, Nadia Calloway was holding a lukewarm cup of coffee and trying not to cry in front of 47 people. She wasn't counting. She just knew the room was full. "Still no ring, Nadia?" Trevor said it loud enough that two nurses at the table behind her stopped mid-conversation. His voice had that particular pitch she'd spent 6 years learning to dread, the one that sounded casual but was designed to land like a fist. "I heard you're still doing the single mom thing. That's brave." He said brave the way people say unfortunate. Nadia set her coffee down, carefully. The way she did everything these days, with precision, because she couldn't afford to spill anything, not coffee, not composure, not the carefully maintained version of herself she'd been building for the past 3 years. "Trevor," she said. "What?" "I'm just saying." He glanced at the woman beside him, young, smooth-skinned, wearing scrubs that still had the packaging creases in them. A medical student, of course. "You always were the serious type. I just thought by now you'd have." He shrugged, moved on. The cafeteria wasn't silent. It was worse than silent. It was the kind of loud where everyone is pretending not to listen while listening to every single word. Nadia thought about her daughter. 6 years old, currently at school, probably sitting cross-legged on a reading rug and sounding out words she only half understood. She thought about the mortgage she'd renegotiated alone, the 4 a.m. pumping sessions that nobody had helped with. The Saturday night she'd spent reviewing charts in bed while Cora slept 3 feet away because the hospital on-call schedule didn't care that she was a single mother. She thought about all of that, and she smiled. "You're right," she said pleasantly. "I am the serious type." Then she picked up her coffee and walked away. She didn't let herself shake until she reached the stairwell. Nadia Reese, she'd gone back to her maiden name the week the divorce was finalized, had been a hospitalist at Whitmore Medical Center for 8 years. She was good at her job in the specific, unsexy way that mattered. She caught things other doctors missed. She communicated with families clearly, and she never made patients feel like a problem to be solved. She was not the kind of doctor who showed up in hospital press releases. She was the kind of doctor who showed up. The problem with being that kind of doctor was that nobody remembered to show up for her. Her mother lived in Phoenix and called every Sunday to remind her she wasn't getting younger. Her best friend, Joe, worked 12-hour shifts at a different hospital across the city and communicated primarily through voice memos and memes. Her daughter, Cora, was the most important person in Nadia's life, and also the reason Nadia hadn't slept a full 8 hours since 2018. And her ex-husband, her charming, sharp-tongued, perpetually disappointed ex-husband, had just reminded her, in front of the entire medical staff of the 3rd floor, that she was still, at 34, ringless and apparently pitiful. She sat on the stairs for 3 minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her white coat, and went back to work. The patient in room 412 needed her more than she needed to feel sorry for herself. She met him at a parking garage. This is the part that would sound absurd if she tried to explain it, so she generally didn't. Not the parking garage itself, but the circumstances. It was 11:15 at night. She was in scrubs. She had one hand full of leftover cafeteria salad, and the other hand wrapped around her phone because she'd been on a call with Cora's school about a field trip form she'd forgotten to sign, and she walked directly into a man who was apparently not watching where he was going either. The salad went everywhere. "I'm so sorry," she started and then looked up, and the apology dissolved somewhere in the back of her throat. The man was tall. That was the first thing. The second thing was the suit, the kind you only saw on certain people, people who moved through the world as if the world had arranged itself around their convenience. The third thing was his face, which was angular and serious and currently looking at the scattered lettuce on the concrete with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "The dressing went on your shoe," Nadia said, because apparently that was what she was going to say. He looked down. There was, in fact, a small amount of balsamic vinaigrette on the toe of a shoe that probably cost more than her car payment. "It did," he agreed. "I wasn't watching where I was going. I'm sorry." She looked around. She had nothing. No napkins, no solutions, nothing useful. "I can't actually fix that." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, something more contained. "Neither can I," he said. "Don't worry about it." He crouched, which surprised her. She'd expected him to call someone, or simply leave, and helped her pick up the scattered remains of her salad, dropping pieces into the overturned container with quiet efficiency. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." She stared at the side of his face while he worked. There was a slight scar along his jaw, thin and old. His hands were clean, careful. "Long shift?" he asked, without looking up. 14 hours. You? Meeting ran late. He stood, handed her the container. "You're a doctor hospitalist." "You're." She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't know how to end it without sounding intrusive. "Constantin Ver," he said. He didn't offer a job title or a company name or a handshake. Just his name. The way you say something that requires no explanation. She hadn't heard of him. She would later understand this made her unusual. "Nadia Reese," she said. He nodded, as if filing it away. "Go home, Dr. Reese," he said. "You look like you need sleep more than salad." And he walked away. And that was, as far as she knew, that. She thought about him exactly twice before she saw him again. Both times she dismissed it as the kind of thing tired brains do. Attaching to small interesting moments because everything else is relentless and routine. The second time she saw him was 6 weeks later, at Cora's school. The parent-teacher conference had run long, and Nadia was waiting in the hallway outside the principal's office because a scheduling mix-up had double-booked the room and the other family hadn't finished yet. She was checking messages on her phone, leaning against the wall, when the door opened and a little girl walked out, 8 or 9, dark-haired, solemn-faced, followed by Constantin Vere. He was wearing a different suit. Still the same quality. He stopped when he saw her. And here is the thing Nadia would think about later. Most people, when they encounter a stranger twice in unexpected circumstances, register it with polite blankness. "Oh, hi again," and move on. Constantin Vere looked at her the way you look at something you'd been expecting to see. "Dr. Reese," he said. "Mr. Vere." The little girl looked between them with the precise, evaluating gaze that only belongs to children and judges. "This is my daughter, Sophie," he said. "Sophie, this is Dr. Reese." Sophie considered her. "Do you work at a hospital?" "I do. My dad doesn't like hospitals, Sophie," Constantine said, with the particular quiet that is more effective than volume. Sophie pressed her lips together, mission apparently accomplished. Nadia looked at him. "Me either, honestly. I just spend all my time in one." That almost smile again, closer this time. The principal's door opened. Nadia's turn. "Good evening, Mr. Vere," she said. "Good evening, Dr. Reese." She went into the meeting, sat down across from Cora's teacher, and spent 20 minutes discussing her daughter's reading progress while some quiet, traitorous part of her brain kept replaying the way he'd said her name. She started seeing him the way you start noticing a word after you learn it everywhere, suddenly, as if he'd always been there. The coffee place near the hospital, a Thursday morning, him reading something on a tablet, glancing up as she pushed through the door and holding it without looking like he was holding it. The hardware store on a Saturday, of all places, Sophie wandering the paint chip aisle while Constantine stood in the power tools section looking mildly out of place in his weekend clothes. Still composed, still quiet, somehow more human with paint chips in his hand. The fourth time, he asked if he could buy her coffee. "You don't have to do that," she said. Again. "You said that before," he said. "In the parking garage. You remember that?" "I remember most things." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't charming in the way Trevor had been charming. That quick, easy warmth that turned out to be performance. Constantine was still in a way that felt earned. Careful, not cold. "Okay," she said. "Coffee." They sat for 40 minutes. He asked about her work without peppering her with questions, just listening when she talked, following threads. She learned almost nothing concrete about him. She knew he worked in development, something large and private, something that didn't require him to explain himself in social situations. When they stood to leave, he said, "Sophie liked you. She was evaluating me the entire time she could see me." "Yes," he said. "She does that. She doesn't like most people she evaluates. Am I supposed to be flattered?" "Yes," he said simply, and the word landed without any of the awkwardness it should have had. She drove home thinking that she was absolutely not going to get involved with anyone right now, least of all a man she knew almost nothing about, whose daughter had treated her like a job interview. She was wrong, of course, about the timing, about her own resolve, about almost everything for a while. It was Cora who broke through her defenses, actually, not Constantine. They'd been seeing each other quietly, carefully, the way two people with children and responsibilities see each other. For 2 months, when he brought Sophie to the park on a Sunday that happened to overlap with Nadia and Cora. It wasn't arranged. Nadia didn't know until she was watching Cora scramble up a climbing structure and heard a small, serious voice say, "You're not doing that right." She turned. Sophie was standing next to Cora, arms crossed, assessing the situation the way she assessed everything. Cora, who was 6 and fearless, and had never once in her life been told she was doing something wrong without immediately arguing about it, looked at Sophie. "Yes, I am. The hand holds are on the other side. If you use those, you won't slip." A pause. Cora considered this. "Okay," she said, and moved. Sophie climbed up beside her, and that was, apparently, that. Nadia was still watching them when Constantine appeared beside her. 2 coffees, one of which he handed her without speaking. "You planned this," she said. "I didn't. Sophie knows your schedule too well for this to be a coincidence." "A beat. She may have had some information," he said. Nadia looked at him. "I think she approves," he said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth something," Nadia admitted. "Cora's vote counts more. She seems to be voting." They both looked at the climbing structure, where Cora was now lecturing Sophie on the best way to reach the top, and Sophie was listening with an expression of reluctant respect. "Yeah," Nadia said. "She is." Here's what Nadia did not know. For 5 months, she did not know that the development company, Constantine, worked for controlled more than 12 properties across the eastern seaboard, many of them acquired in circumstances that did not withstand public scrutiny. She did not know that his measured calm was the product of 20 years navigating situations that would have broken most people. She did not know about the Ver name, what it meant in certain rooms, why certain conversations stopped when he entered them. She did not know that the man who drove Sophie to school in the morning and helped her rehearse the periodic table at the kitchen table was, in a world that existed below the surface of his ordinary-looking life, someone people in those rooms called the architect. She found out the way you find out things that change everything, by accident on an unremarkable Tuesday. She'd come to his apartment to return a book Sophie had left at Cora's during a play date. She had her own key by then. He'd given it to her 3 months in, without ceremony, the way he did most things. She knocked first, habit, and when nobody answered, she let herself in. The apartment was quiet. She was setting the book on the kitchen counter when she heard his voice coming from the study, low, still, the way he sounded when he was focused. "Tell him the terms don't change," he said. "He can accept them, or I will take the other offer, and he will spend the next decade explaining to his investors why he handed that deal to someone who wasn't me." A pause. No, not a conversation, a statement of fact. Another pause. His voice, when it came again, had dropped further. "I don't repeat myself, Marcus. That's not something I do." Nadia stood very still in the kitchen. She had heard him quiet before. She had heard him firm. But this was something else. There was no warmth in it, no social register, no performance of any kind. This was what he sounded like when nobody was moderating anything. She left the book on the counter and let herself out before he finished. She didn't say anything that night, or the next day. On the 3rd day, he asked. They were in her kitchen, Cora asleep, doing the quiet adult, nothing that happens after children go to bed. She had a case file open. He had his tablet, 2 glasses of wine. Neither of them had finished. "You're thinking something you haven't told me," he said, without looking up from whatever he was reading. Nadia looked at him. "I came by Tuesday. I heard part of a phone call." He set the tablet down. The movement was measured. "What did you hear?" "Enough to know that whatever it is you actually do, it's not what I thought." She paused. "And enough to know that whoever you were talking to was afraid of you." The silence stretched. He didn't fill it with justifications, didn't move toward reassurance, just looked at her steadily and waited. "Is it illegal?" she asked. "Some of it operates in gray areas," he said. "Nothing that directly harms people." That's a carefully worded answer. It's an honest one. She thought about Cora, upstairs. About the 6 years she'd spent building something that was entirely her own. A career, a home, a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. She thought about Trevor in the cafeteria, performing cruelty for an audience, and how she'd learned that a person who looks safe can hollow you out as effectively as anyone. "I need to know more," she said. He nodded. "Just that." "I'm not asking you to dismantle anything," she continued. "I'm asking you to not make me feel like an idiot who fell in love with a story." The word love sat between them. She hadn't meant to say it exactly then. She watched something move across his face, something real, which was how she knew it mattered. "You're not an idiot," he said, "and what I feel for you is not a story." He told her. Not everything. She understood later that everything would have taken years. But the framework of it. Enough that she could hold it without pretending it wasn't heavy. She sat with it for a long time after he finished. "Sophie knows?" she asked. "Not the details. She knows I handle complicated things. She's 8 and she evaluates people at the door. She has some idea." He almost smiled. "Probably. Okay," Nadia said. He looked at her carefully. "Okay? I'm not running. I'm not pretending I didn't hear what I heard. But I'm also not." She stopped, chose her words. "I've spent 3 years building a life I'm not ashamed of. I'm not going to anything that puts Cora at risk, or my work, or my ability to look at myself in the mirror. I wouldn't ask you to. Then we keep talking." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. No grand gesture. Just that. "Yes," he said. "We keep talking." She married him in October. It was small. Joe, her mother, who cried immediately and continuously. Sophie, Cora, a few people from Constantine's world whose last name she was still learning. A judge she'd never met before and hoped not to need professionally. Cora wore a dress she'd selected herself, pink with too much tulle, and had a significant opinion about where everyone stood. Sophie had helped pick the flowers and presented this information with the solemnity of a professional consultant. Nobody announced it. There was no social media, no announcement in the paper. There were practical reasons for this. Constantine had enemies, or at least complications, in the way that people with his kind of power always did. But there was also something that felt right about it, something that belonged to them. She kept her name at work. She kept her apartment on the lease for 3 more months, until she was ready to let go of the insurance of it. She kept her schedule, her patience, her Saturday morning coffee ritual. She kept herself. The ring was simple, a narrow gold band with one small diamond, nothing that announced itself. The kind of ring you could wear through a 12-hour shift and not think about. She thought about it constantly. Trevor found out, because these things always find their way to people who were not meant to know them. It was not his fault. Not exactly. He worked at the same hospital. He moved through the same professional circles. And he was at his core a person who paid careful attention to status, who had it, who was losing it, who had somehow acquired more than he'd expected. He noticed the ring first. She saw him notice it across the nurse's station, that quick, recalibrating look. She kept walking. He caught up with her in the hallway outside the elevator bank 3 weeks after the wedding. He was with 2 other attendings, which told her the audience was not incidental. Nadia. His voice had changed from the cafeteria, less casual, more controlled. "I heard congratulations are in order." "Thank you," she said pleasantly. "I didn't know you were seeing anyone. I know you didn't." A small pause. The other 2 attendings had stopped, genuinely paying attention now. "Who is he?" Trevor asked, and underneath the question, she'd had 6 years of practice reading him, was something she recognized as fear, not of her, of something he'd sensed but couldn't identify. "His name is Constantine Vere," she said. She watched Trevor run the name. She watched the moment it landed. It registered the way things register when you realize you're standing in a room with a floor that is much less solid than it appeared. "Vere," he repeated. "Yes." The 2 attendings were very still. "You're married to Constantine Vere," Trevor said. Not a question anymore. For almost a month now. She pressed the elevator button. "We had a lovely ceremony." Trevor opened his mouth and closed it again. She had never, in 6 years of marriage and 3 years of co-parenting and countless professional interactions, seen him fail to produce a response. The elevator opened. "Have a good evening, Trevor," she said and stepped inside. She let the doors close. She called Joe on the drive home. He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him, she said. I mean, Joe said, in a certain sense, someone had. I almost felt bad. Did you? Nadia thought about it. The cafeteria, the medical student, that's brave. The specific, practiced cruelty of a man who had always assumed he occupied more space than the people around him. No, she said, not really. Joe made a sound that was mostly satisfaction. What she hadn't expected was Constantine's reaction when she told him. They were in the kitchen, their kitchen, which was still a phrase she was getting used to, and Sophie was at a friend's house, and Cora was doing homework at the table with the focused chaos of a child who needed to write 3 sentences but had generated 9. Nadia told him the story while she made dinner. She wasn't performing anything. She was just telling her husband about her day. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He's afraid of my name, he said. Yes, but not of you. She turned to look at him. He wasn't afraid of you before, Constantine said. It wasn't accusatory. It was just careful, attentive. He should have been. He was never paying close enough attention to know what I was. No. He crossed to where she was standing, and she felt him behind her, warm, certain, unhurried. But he'll have a very accurate picture of it now. I don't want his fear, she said. I know. His hand was on her back, steady. You never needed it. She turned around. I need you to understand something, she said. I didn't marry you for this. For whatever his face did in that hallway. I know that. I married you because Sophie passed the bar and Cora climbed a structure correctly, and you give me coffee without asking, and you told me the truth even when you didn't have to. He looked at her the way he had in that parking garage, like something he'd been expecting, like something he recognized. I know, he said again, and softer. I know why you married me. Cora chose this moment to announce that she had finished her sentences and also had written a poem, which she was going to read aloud immediately, whether they were ready or not. Constantine stepped back. Nadia turned back to the stove. Go ahead, baby, she called. The poem was, as Cora's poems always were, both remarkably sincere and structurally ambitious. Sophie arrived home halfway through the reading and sat down at the table without being asked, listening with the expression of someone who found the whole thing more interesting than she intended to. Nadia stood at the stove, listening to her daughter's voice fill the kitchen, watching Constantine's face in her periphery. Still, open, present in a way she'd spent too long thinking wasn't available to her. She thought about the parking garage, the cafeteria, the 6 years before Constantine and the 3 years after, and this one, now, which felt different from all of them in ways she still didn't have words for. She thought, I did not need rescuing. I built something real, on my own, with my hands and my sleepless nights and my stubbornness. She thought, but there's nothing weak about letting someone stand beside it with you. Cora finished her poem. Everyone clapped, Cora took a bow, and Sophie immediately began explaining how the meter in the 3rd stanza could be improved. Nadia laughed, and the dinner didn't burn, and the kitchen stayed warm, and the life she'd built, all of it, the hard parts, and the unexpected parts, and the parts she couldn't have planned, held.